Darrin.
Good morning, Jay. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome back. So what's on the agenda? We're going to be talking about a list of great books that you've compiled that those who really want to understand how the world should work might want to take a look at, right?
That's absolutely right. You know, it's when you start talking about lists of books, it always seems that every year at the end of the year and then also right before summer, all of the periodicals publish what are highly popular lists of not only the great books, but the great books for conservatism of the last century, and, of course, a reading list of the great books that have come out in the last year. Today I thought we would discuss what were considered to be the 10 books that shaped the American conservative renaissance, as noted by Dr. Jeffrey Nelson, who is the chief publisher at the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, which really is very interesting. You know, a lot of folks, and I know a lot of people are just now becoming involved in politics over the past couple of years through the Tea Parties, and a lot of times what happens is these people, they know what they're against, but they have a difficulty articulating what it is that they're for. Exactly.
I first became familiar with ISI, Intercollegiate Studies Institute, through Russell Kirk. I hate to date myself like this, but back in 1973, ISI has been at the forefront of the American intellectual movement, conservative movement, all along. And Jeff, the fellow who wrote this, was a student of Russell's and wound up marrying his daughter, Cecilia. So let's go through. You're exactly right. The problem is what we're finding is this new resurgence, especially the Tea Parties, and people who are just finally realizing that they have got to get involved in democracy because the country is now really going off the rails. They, like you say, they know what they're against, but they don't know what they should be for, and often they don't understand the very basic principles. And I often think if people could just understand basic Austrian economics or just the basic concepts of sound money, we could restore this country, at least the economy, fairly quickly. So what's number one on?
I think you're right on that, Jay. And, you know, the difficult thing is for guys like me who are in the clerisy being the scholars, the clergy, the bookmen, the critics that help midwife and really help popularize some of the higher philosophical ideas. When we talk about the work that ISI does, you know, they call themselves the ivory tower conservatives, and so some of this stuff is really difficult for your average reader to approach. And so, you know, I kind of laugh. You know, last week we did this segment on books, and a fan said that boy, you sure managed to make a segment about books interesting to the non-reader, yeah. Which is a pretty tall order. Yeah, so I don't want to just go through a list, but I really want to kind of share the bullet points as well. You know, we don't want to have the new Tea Party people picking up Adam Smith's An Inquiry into the Nation and Causes of the Wealth of Nations when really what they need is someone to explain it to them along the way. And so that becomes far more critical. Yeah. That we do that. And so let me start off, since you mentioned economics, let me start off by mentioning a book by one of the greatest American humorists, P.J. O'Rourke, who wrote a book, An Inquiry into the Inquiry on the Wealth of Nations, and it's hilarious and it's simple, and people can pick that up. Also, if you're going to get serious about reading right books, get a guide to the right books. And so I always recommend from the Heritage Foundation, Dr. Lee Edwards, Reading the Right Books, a guide for the intelligent conservative. There's 101 great books in this book that all have that conservative bent.
Now that would be available on the Heritage. You could find it on the Heritage website.
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to Amazon and get a used copy as well.
For those who have not read P.J. O'Rourke, he has to be among the funniest guys writing today, either here or in Europe. Funniest funny guy.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, the real flagship book for PJ is The Parliament of Whores, which he wrote in 1991, and is absolutely hilarious and is really an outstanding book in the vein of the critic of the Leviathan, the ever-growing government. So,
now, what would one find in his would we say it's a rewrite or an analysis of the Wealth of Nations? What would we describe that book? So why should I get it for my son, for example?
Well, you had Harry Vereiser on, who is a leading living Austrian economist, and I always look at the great chain of being, or the people that are advancing ideas that are really adding links to the chain. Guys like Harry, more as a totem pole, whereas as Harry is standing on the great Austrian economists, also including the Chicago School people like Milton Friedman, but the Austrians, whether they be Friedrich von Hayek or Wilhelm Röpke or Ludwig von Mises or Eugene von Bavarik or Karl Menger, these men were standing on the shoulders of Friedrich Bastiat, who was standing on the shoulders of Adam Smith. And so the reason I mention Adam Smith is because Adam Smith is at the bottom of the totem pole, and everybody built on top of that. And Adam Smith was the first of liberty's economists who talked about the invisible hand, how everybody working in their own self-interest ends up really creating the wealth of nations by being the rising tide that lifts all boats. And so that government's real job is, like Friedrich von Hayek said, is kind of like the job of a gardener, that in order to get his plants to grow, he must know as much as possible about the society and how it functions, because we can't force plants to grow, but we can create the conditions in which a plant or a garden can thrive.
Okay.
So PJ's book is hilarious. It's simple, and it really does a fantastic job of really teasing out the eternal verities of Adam Smith's work. Yeah.
Okay, what's next?
Well, what I thought I'd do next is go into to Dr. Nelson's book of 10 books that shaped the American conservative Renaissance. But I kind of broke out my A team today here, and what I thought I'd do is just kind of walk you through the 20th century. It started off, certainly the conservatives' founding fathers, Russell Kirk would say, is Edmund Burke. Now, some folks might say it's John Milton or Virgil, but Edmund Burke really started it off, and some people say it was Aristotle fighting with Plato, or Homer and Hesiod. But Burke started off Tocqueville in the 19th century, did a fantastic work on America when he came and visited democracy in America. But at the turn of the 20th century, conservatism was in many ways beaten. The era of progressivism had really taken root. And so we had writers, for the American Mercury, folks like H.L. Mencken, G.K. Chesterton, Irving Babbitt did some incredible work, including a book that folks that are really interested in becoming leaders in politics rather than just activists. Russell Kirk called it one of the most brilliant books, is Democracy and Leadership by Irving Babbitt, in which he says that he really just devastates the whole concept of the utilitarians and the humanitarians that want to treat the world like a science as opposed to treating individuals as the irrational creatures they are.
Now, what year was Irving Babbitt's book published?
I think Democracy and Leadership was 24. 1919, he published Rousseau and Romanticism, which is really an undiscovered book. It's really fantastic.
Now, this list, by the way, we could find this. We could learn more about Babbitt's book. Where on the internet? What?
Just Google the 10 books at ISI.
Oh, good. Okay,
and look for Jeff Nelson's. Not only does he have the 10 books that I'll describe right now, but also there's a list at the end that's really good. NRO publishes a great list, Intelligent Conservative as well. So there's a bunch of them. But the first of the 10 books, I should point out, is a Michigan man to some extent, Albert J. Nock. He spent several years in Alpena. He was a priest in Detroit. He wrote in 1935 a little book called Our Enemy, the State.
Yep, I read that.
Although the book in the top 10 is the Memoirs of a Superfluous Man, which is too expensive for my blood to own a copy, but you can get a free one on Mises.org, as you can get almost all of Albert J. Nock's writings. Okay. Albert J. Nock is, he's writing in the 30s, in the 20s, and it's very interesting that this man is he calls himself a little conservative, but then he also talks about how the state is constantly growing and usurping power and taking money, confiscating money for the corrupted influences of the people who want to stay in power. And so in some ways, he picks up from Irving Babbitt on the humane life, the good life. He wrote an incredible book on the good life. So Albert J. Nock, partially a Michigan man,
Now we're
it's a great one to look into.
It looks like we got about 3 minutes.
Okay.
So
I better hustle through these next.
Yeah.
10
Well, let me
then.
just say a little bit about Knock. My son found Knock's book as I think he was a senior in school, and I had not mentioned my Knock to him, and Sean walked up and he said, "Man, Dad, this is really a cool book." So it is a great book, certainly, absolutely. Okay, what's
Knock is one of my favorites, and the nice thing is all my my anarcho-capitalist friends and I have an affection for Knock in common. Next, 1936. Ludwig von Mises comes out with the book Socialism, and really, I mean, you think about what's happened in 1936. For a guy to come out there and to turn over in his mind so completely the folly of socialism, of collectivism, of command and control economies, was really an amazing thing. And the American conservative movement knew instantly that this was a man who was a strong supporter of freedom. The Austrian school really starts taking root. In 1944, Ludwig von Mises' apprentice, Friedrich von Hayek, writes The Road to Serfdom. Also during the 40s, which is that Friedrich von Hayek book is one of my all-time favorites,
Sure.
The Road to Serfdom. But also in the 40s, you have C.S. Lewis and the Inklings and Tolkien. Yeah. Writing books that, like C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength, is like a George Orwell 1984 for Christians.
Oh, absolutely!
And I highly recommend not only that, but I mean, C.S. Lewis wrote the Screw Tape Letters, and so you just don't get a more amazing book than that. Also in 37, I'm sorry, Jay, I don't mean to step on you there.
No, you're absolutely C.S. Lewis. Every literate person should know C.S. Lewis. And every literate person should know Tolkien, and especially the movie Lord of the Rings actually didn't even do justice to the book, either The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. So two of the great giants.
You know, the tiniest book that everybody should read that's in the conservative movement is his book Abolition, The Abolition of Man.
Oh yeah.
And The Hideous Strength was built on that. Also in 1937, I've got to mention Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which is, George Orwell wrote a book about dystopian society in 1984, where everybody was poor and the proletarians were, they were just totally overrun by the inner party people.
Darrin,
yes,
we are going to. We have less than 30 seconds. So thanks for being with us.
You bet, Jay,
we're
my pleasure. Thanks a lot. Look forward to next week when we talk about Revolutionary Era books.
Absolutely. And I want everybody to be sure to get to Leo's Coney Island and tell them that I recommended you, and you're going to get a 10% discount. Hey, we're going to look forward to being with you again next week.